What lovely sounding music this is. It's hard to believe this instrument, the lyre, dates back thousands of years. Stringed instruments, like the lyre, the guitar, or the violin, may seem complex and difficult to learn, but because they've been around for so long, there's a vast amount of resources available for anyone pursuing mastery in this field. When I was first picking up the bass, I had no idea where to begin, but before I knew it, I was surrounded by quality information that's been built up over centuries. The same cannot be said for esports and speedrunning. Comparatively, they've only just started to exist. The information around esports and speedrunning is shrouded by its youth. The current answers to basic questions like how do I improve or how much should I practice are missing the nuance and research that exists in the world of music. This lack of nuance leads to gamers believing the epitome of a champion is someone who grinds all day, every day. I don't blame anyone for thinking this way. I mean, we were raised seeing a dozen 14-year-olds locked in a house grinding gold in World of Warcraft for 12 hours a day, esports teams scrimming all day, or speedrunners resetting endlessly, stream after stream. In reality, slamming raw hours against a wall is the most meathead way to go about improvement. If we instead look at the research and principles applied to learning music, perhaps we can find a better way. By doing this, we may be able to find founded solutions to the question, how much should I practice? And in doing so, dismantle all the myths about practice length. Consistency. Success isn't always about greatness. It's about consistency. Consistent hard work leads to success. Greatness will come. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. When researching the question, how much should I practice, one principle kept popping up: consistency. There are some universal truths in the world, and it's pretty easy to spot what they are when you start to see them pop up everywhere. Consistency and persistence are universal truths to success. During my time learning bass, the first thing every music teacher told me was practice every single day. Elon Musk has said persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up. My favorite quote of all time is by Mary Pickford. She said, "This thing we call failure is not the falling down, but the staying down." Hell, even in a kid's movie like Finding Nemo, Dory famously says, "When life gets you down, you know what you gotta do? Just keep swimming." Even the psychos who preach 10 hours a day, every day, got one thing right: practice every day. There are 3 key reasons why consistency has such a big impact on improvement. Firstly, being consistent ensures that your abilities will never deteriorate. Even practicing just 20 minutes a day is enough to maintain the skills that you've built up. Imagine if, instead, you practiced for a week straight and then took a fortnight off. Upon returning that 4th week to resume practice, it's going to cost you a lot of upfront time and effort before you regain the skills lost during your break. Maintaining consistency saves you countless hours by ensuring you never have to waste time relearning. Next, when you remain consistent, you begin to accumulate hours and experience, each hour being one step closer to mastery. It's likely that you'll accumulate far more hours by remaining consistent, even if you only practice an hour or 2 a day, compared to someone else who falls in and out of motivation at the drop of a hat. Even if someone has the motivation to practice 6 hours a day for 30 days, at the end of that month, they'll probably burn out and give up entirely. If this person instead only did an hour or 2 worth of practice a day, but kept it up for a whole year, they would have accumulated over 500 hours of practice, none of which would be time spent relearning anything. Lastly, consistency matters so much because of what happens when we sleep. During sleep, the neural pathways in our brain are strengthened. This results in a greater understanding of a subject or an improved amount of technical ability. You could practice 5 hours a day every day for years, but if you never slept, you would never improve, ignoring the fact that you would die along the way. Every day that you practice and sleep is another day you improve. Compare that to practicing 6 hours twice a week. You may be practicing a greater total number of hours than someone who's practicing only 1 hour a day, but the person who practices every single day gets an extra 5 days of sleep to go along with their practice. That makes a big difference. You may have already known that consistency is key, but I wanted to stress its importance before anything else. Now, I'm sure everyone out there who believes in the all-day, everyday way of thinking is probably asking, Well, if practicing every day is so useful, then why not just practice 6 or 8 or 10 hours every day? What's the harm in that? Wouldn't that be the most optimal way to practice? Why long practice falls flat. It's not about the number of hours you practice. It's about the number of hours your mind is present during the practice. Kobe Bryant. While it is true some people can maintain practice days lasting 8 hours, this is not optimal for most people. It's just too much. Let's talk about the 3 main reasons why practicing around 8 hours a day is pure folly for 99% of people. 1. Long practice sessions tend to become mindless. Your initial intent gets lost in the sauce of time. 2. During long practice sessions, your mind will naturally start to fatigue, and your effectiveness will plummet. 3. Very few people have the time or ability to practice for 8 or more hours every day. You may be forced to skip practice sessions, or you might burn out and give up entirely. Finding what works best for you and what you can reasonably stick to is a far smarter way to improve. Goals are a key part of efficient practice, but when you practice for hours on end, it's easy to forget your initial intent. A perfect example can be found in my own experience when learning bass. I was learning how to play Ode to Viceroy, a relatively simple song, but I was really struggling with the timing. My bass teacher told me the best thing to do would be to spend some time practicing with a metronome. Now, over the week before my next lesson, I may have neglected to practice a bit, so the day before my lesson, I decided to practice all day. At first, I was doing great. I put on the metronome and I tried to play with it. But after maybe like an hour or something, the metronome was kind of getting boring, so I just wanted to play it however I wanted to. And then, at that point, the metronome's just kind of like a background annoyance, so I turned that whack shit off. Let me tell you, it goes way harder on mute. So, I play the song a bit more, but then, after a while, I just started wanting to play some other shit. So I started playing some other shit. And then, eventually 6 hours in or whatever, I'm just plucking random strings with no thought at all. Anyways, so the next day during my lesson, my teacher asked me how long I practiced the last week. And excited, I said 8 hours. Excited to hear my progress, the teacher asked me to play. Turns out my timing was still dog shit. I'm sure my teacher must have been wondering how I could possibly still be this atrocious after 8 hours of practice. Instead of being a moron, if I had just practiced 30 minutes a day while paying attention to the metronome, I would have made much more progress, perhaps even perfecting the timing of the song. Well, sure, 1 hour a day is better than 8 hours on one day, but what if I just practice for 8 hours every day? Well, why don't we take a look at what the science has to say about that? The German doctor Professor Eckhard Altenmüller is a leading researcher in the neurophysiology of musicians. He has conducted countless studies on practice quality and quantity. In one study, Altenmüller had participants perform various mechanical tasks over a period of time. During this time, the performance of each individual was recorded. Here's a slide from a presentation done by Altenmüller discussing the results of his study. Along the x-axis, we see the amount of time spent, and on the y-axis, we see the quality of performance recorded. We can clearly see that there's a peak in the middle, after which the performance of each individual starts to rapidly decline. What this data tells us, and what Altenmüller goes on to say during his presentation, is that after a certain amount of time, your ability to perform starts to decrease. Your hands start to shake, your brain starts to slouch, and your focus gets a little tired. This isn't to say that once you reach this peak in performance, all practice afterwards is pointless, only that mindlessly practicing for hours is a mistake. Finally, let's discuss this unrealistic idea of practicing for 8 hours a day, every day. You may have the motivation to practice for 8 hours a day, one day, but can you keep it up for a whole year? Or 5 years? Or 10 years? Consistency is the most important element. We've figured that out. So you must choose a practice schedule that you can stick to for years. You may be inclined to dismiss this argument on the basis of discipline or sheer willpower. But come on, why don't we be honest with ourselves? The ancient Greeks had 3 maxims inscribed in the forefront of the temple of Apollo at Delphi. The first of which being, know thyself. If you want to improve, you must find a practice routine that you personally can maintain. Everybody's different. 8 hours a day for the average chap is just absurd, and it's likely to cause burnout and discontentment. You may never become the best, but you can still become very good. Perhaps in speedrunning or esports, you could even become a professional on the back of only 3 hours of practice a day, if you did so every day for a long time. Certainly, you'll beat out any guys who think that they should practice for 8 hours a day and only manage to keep it up for like a week. Sure, there are some crazy lunatics out there who are more than just obsessed and can practice for 8 hours a day. Or more likely, they have to practice for 8 hours a day, or they'll just go insane. Unless you are truly mad, like one of these people, you're gonna need to find a routine that fits your needs. Know thyself, and you will outperform everyone else who thinks they're something they're not. Marcus Garvey, this Jamaican guy who was, pretty smart and did some stuff, I think, said, "May I say something to you to give you a true knowledge of yourself and life, so that the same glory and success obtained by other men who understand themselves may be yours? Man in the full knowledge of himself is a superb and supreme creature of creation. When man becomes possessor of the knowledge of himself, he becomes master of his environment, the captain of his own ship, the director of his own destiny, and the accomplisher of his own ends." Conclusion. Consistent, maintainable, and focused practice, oriented for your personal needs, will outperform the unrealistic ambition of those who demand 8 hours of practice every day. If you want to improve, you don't need to bash your head into a wall all day every day, playing until your fingers bleed or your eyes burn. By spending only 1 or 2 hours of practice a day, if you do so every day, you'll reach a much higher level of skill. Find the right fit for you. Know thyself, and you'll see more results than a guy who falls in and out of motivation each week.